Americans have more money sitting in retirement accounts than at any point in human history, and they are yanking it back out faster than at any point in 20 years. Both true. Same 12 months. Somewhere this morning, a guy is staring at a record account balance on his phone and a withdrawal form on the same screen, and his thumb is hovering over the wrong one. My name is Nick, and I've spent an unreasonable share of my life reading spreadsheets that explain why hardworking people end up 70 and still setting an alarm. If you've ever put money into a retirement account and felt absolutely nothing happen, hit subscribe, because today we're fixing the order of operations. Not the amount, the order. 3 people are walking through this with you. Ella, 37, dental hygienist in Reno. Josiah, 44, runs an HVAC crew outside Toledo. Olivia, 29, claims adjuster in Charlotte. Same paycheck, 3 different leaks. One of them ends this decade with almost nothing, and it isn't the one you'd guess. Let's start with the destination, because almost nobody actually prices out what never working again costs. The standard rule is 25 times your annual spending, not your income, your spending. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts average household spending at $78,535 a year. That's a mean dragged upward by high earners, so roughly half of households spend meaningfully less. But take it at face value, and 25 times it is just under $2 million. That's the price tag in one number. Now here's where America actually stands. Vanguard just published its 25th annual report covering nearly 5 million workers, and the average 401k balance hit a record $167,970. That sounds encouraging until you look one column over. The median, the person standing exactly in the middle of the line, has $44,115. Run the standard 4% withdrawal on that, and you get $1,765 a year, $147 a month. That's a tank of gas and a mid-sized grocery run. That's not a retirement, that's a Tuesday, and it doesn't touch the electric bill. The gap between those two numbers is not a story about who works hard and who doesn't. Ella, Josiah, and Olivia all work hard. Ella scrapes plaque off strangers' molars 40 hours a week. Josiah has been on a roof in August. The gap is about sequence. Almost everyone attacks this problem in the wrong order, and the wrong order quietly eats 15 or 20 years. Here's what most people do. They get serious, they open an app, they start investing, and 11 months later something breaks, the money comes back out, and they decide this stuff doesn't work for people like them. It works fine, it was just plugged into a bucket with holes in it. So 4 of these 5 things aren't investments at all. They're leak repairs. Only the 5th one is about growth, and it only works after the other 4. Step 1 is the only guaranteed return anyone will ever offer you, and it is sitting in your payroll portal right now behind a password you set in 2019 and have not thought about since. Employer matching contributions have quietly climbed to a record. The average employer promises a match worth 4.7% of pay. The median promise is 4%, which tells you the average is being pulled up by generous plans at big companies, so check yours instead of assuming. But the structure is the same everywhere. Your employer has agreed to hand you additional money in cash for doing paperwork. This is the least American transaction ever invented, and most people walk right past it because claiming it requires finding a website, remembering a login, and typing a number into a box. Ella makes $60,000. Her plan matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of pay. So if she puts in $3,600, her employer adds $1,800. That's an instant 50% return before the market does anything at all. Nothing else in finance offers that. Not real estate, not crypto, not your brother-in-law's supplement company. Now watch what happens if she does only this and nothing else. The employer money alone, compounded for 30 years at 7%, comes to $266,000. At a more conservative 5%, $187,000, that's from the portion she never contributed. That's the tip. Here's the trap though. Automatic enrollment is now standard and it has genuinely helped. Participation among eligible workers hit a record 86%. But it gets you in the door at a default rate, and the default is usually below the full match. So you get the warm feeling of participating while leaving a chunk of your own compensation on the table. The last time anyone measured it properly, about 1 in 4 workers were missing part of their match at an average of $1,336 a year. That's not a savings mistake, that's a pay cut you volunteered for. One more thing nobody mentions. Some plans match per paycheck with no true up, so if you front load and hit the annual cap in September, the match just stops in October. Fewer than half of plans protect you from that. Search your plan document for the words true up. 10-minute read, occasionally worth thousands. The second thing is the one everybody skips, and it is the only reason step 1 survives. Buy yourself 90 days of saying no. It feels like the opposite of building wealth. It's cash, it sits there, it does nothing exciting, and it is the single reason some people's investments make it to year 10 and other people's don't. Only 30% of Americans say they'd cover a $1,000 emergency out of savings. Fewer than half have the liquidity to handle it at all, and a third would go into debt over it. Among people who do have a cushion, the median is $5,000, half what the same survey found a year earlier. So the cushion is thinning, and you can watch exactly where it's going. 6% of Vanguard's 401k participants took a hardship withdrawal last year. That's the highest share ever recorded, up from 4.8% the year before, and roughly triple the pre-pandemic rate. 6th straight annual increase. The median withdrawal was $1,900. That $1,900 is the whole video in a single number, so let me show you what it costs. Left alone for 30 years at 7%, that money becomes $14,463. Withdrawn early after the 10% penalty in ordinary income tax, the worker actually receives about $1,292. So the trade is roughly 14,000 future dollars for 1,300 present ones. That is the worst exchange rate available in America, and it doesn't even come with an airport pretzel. Josiah made that exact trade. His condenser fan motor went out on the family van, then his daughter needed a crown, and there was no cash anywhere, so he raided the 401k for $2,000 and told himself he'd put it back. Nobody puts it back. A hardship withdrawal isn't a loan. There's no repayment schedule, it's just gone. So the fix is boring on purpose. 3 to 6 months of expenses in a separate account at a bank you don't have a debit card for. At average household spending, 3 months is about $19,600. That's a big number, and I'm not pretending otherwise, so start with 1 month. 1 month of expenses converts a catastrophe into an inconvenience, and put it somewhere that pays you. The FDIC says the national average savings account yields 0.38%, which is a rounding error with a marketing budget, while high-yield accounts are paying north of 4% right now. On $10,000, that's the difference between $38 a year and about $415. Same money, same access, one phone call. Number 3 is a guaranteed return wearing the costume of a monthly bill. Buy off the 22%. The average interest rate on cards actually carrying a balance is now 22.15%, up from 21.52 just 1 quarter earlier. Americans owe $1.25 trillion on credit cards inside a total household debt load of $18.8 trillion. The average balance per cardholder is about $6,500, though the median is closer to $3,000, so the average is being inflated by a smaller group carrying a lot. Here's what carrying $6,500 at 22% actually looks like when you pay the minimum. 257 months, 21 years, $17,430 paid in total, of which about $11,000 is pure interest. The minimum payment isn't a plan for getting out of debt, it's the lender's business model printed politely on your statement. Same debt, $250 a month instead. 36 months. $8,938 total. You just saved $8,500 by pressing a different button. And this is the part that reframes everything. Paying off a 22% card is a 22% return, guaranteed, tax-free, with zero volatility. Compare that to what the market is actually being forecast to do. Vanguard's model currently anticipates annualized returns of about 3.9 to 5.9% for US stocks over the next decade because valuations are stretched. So you have a guaranteed 22 sitting next to a hopeful 5. This isn't close. This isn't even in the same area code. Ella carries no card balance, which is the deeply unglamorous reason her match actually compounds instead of quietly funding somebody's interest revenue. And the person doing the most damage with this particular leak is, by a wide margin, the highest earner of our three. That's why the order matters. Match first, because 50% instant beats everything. Then the cushion, because without it, you're back on the card by spring. Then the debt. Then, and only then, the slow accounts. Which brings us to number 4, the account almost nobody in this country uses correctly. Everyone knows about the 401k and the Roth. Fine, for 2026, you can put $24,500 into a 401k. If you're 50 or older, you get another $8,000 on top of that. And if you happen to be 60 through 63, there's a strange little window where that catch-up jumps to $11,250 instead, which exists for reasons only Congress can explain. IRAs sit separately at $7,500, and maxing those out is not the assignment. Only 14% of savers hit the maximum, and someone earning $50,000 would have to hand over half of every paycheck to get there. That's not a plan, that's a hostage situation. The assignment is the order, not the ceiling. Which brings me to the health savings account, which is quietly the best account in the American tax code and is being used by almost nobody the way it's designed. Money goes in untaxed, grows untaxed, and comes out untaxed for medical costs. 3 tax breaks. Nothing else in the entire tax code does that. If you contribute through payroll, you also dodge FICA. So a $4,400 contribution saves you around $1,300 in tax in a single year at a typical bracket. Here's the state of it. Americans hold about $174 billion across 1.7 million health savings accounts. Roughly 4.2 million of those accounts, about 10%, have any of that money actually invested. The other 90% is sitting in cash. It's a retirement account wearing a checking account costume. And you can see the cost of the confusion directly, because accounts that do invest average $24,252, nearly 10 times the average uninvested one. Olivia had one for 4 years and never once logged in. Her employer Otto opened it during onboarding, deposited $500, and she assumed it was some kind of insurance thing. $4,400 a year, invested for 30 years at 7%, is $415,000. Tax-free on the way in, tax-free on the way up, tax-free on the way out. She was 4 clicks from that and didn't know the clicks existed. You do need a qualifying high-deductible plan for this, so it isn't for everyone, and if you'll be spending that money every year, then it's a spending account, and that's fine too. But if your plan doesn't qualify, don't check out on me here, because the same move exists for you in a different building. Your version of Step 4 is a Roth IRA, funded and then actually invested rather than left sitting in cash, which is the identical mistake wearing a different account number. But if you can cover current medical bills out of pocket and leave the account alone, it turns into the most efficient retirement vehicle you will ever touch. By the way, I opened a school community where I break down exactly this kind of thing step by step with the actual spreadsheets, plus how I'd build income outside a paycheck in this economy. It's free, the link is below, and I'd genuinely like to see you in there. Okay, back to it. And the 5th thing is the one that actually decides it, because savings rate is the only variable in this equation that ever really mattered. You buy your raises back. Here's the number I promised you at the start. As I'm recording this, the US personal saving rate is sitting at 2.6%, and it has been drifting downward all year. If you save 2.6% of your income and earn a reasonable 5% real return, the math says you reach 25 times your spending in roughly 80 years. 80, you'd need to start working as a toddler and retire posthumously. Now hold everything else constant and just move that one dial. At 10%, it's 52 years. At 15%, 43. At 20%, 37, at 30%, 28 years, at 50%, 17 years. Same market, same returns, same person. The only thing that changed is the fraction of your paycheck that never entered your checking account. Olivia was at 6% when she started paying attention. She's at 14 now, and she did not get a promotion, move cities, or start a side business to do it. She moved one dial twice and took roughly a decade off her own number. That's the whole game, and it's why invest more is useless advice on its own. Your return is not under your control. Your income is only partly under your control, your savings rate is almost entirely under your control, and it is the variable with the most brutal leverage in the entire equation. But nobody can jump from 2% to 30% on a Tuesday. So here's the mechanism that actually works, and it's the reason I called this step buying your raises back. When you get a raise, your spending rises to meet it within about 2 months. Within 8 weeks, it has been fully digested by a slightly nicer grocery store and a subscription you don't remember authorizing. The money doesn't disappear, it gets absorbed, like a paper towel commercial where the spill is your retirement, so you intercept it before it lands. The moment a raise or a bonus hits, you increase your contribution rate by the same amount that same day before your lifestyle has time to file a claim on it. Watch what that does. One 3% raise on $60,000 is $1,800 a year. Banked and invested for 30 years at 7%, that single raise becomes $170,000. Now bank every raise for 30 years, 3% a year, never once cutting your current lifestyle. You end up with $2.3 million, and by the final year, you're saving $85,000 annually without having given up a single thing you had at the start. You bought your $2 million number using money you never got used to spending. That's the entire trick Olivia ran. Her last raise was 4%. She read the email, opened the payroll portal in the same sitting, moved her contribution up 4 points, and then went back to work. The raise never touched her checking account, so she never had to give it up. 71% of plans now have automatic escalation built in. So in a lot of cases, this is a checkbox you already have. Turn it on once, and the decision quietly gets made for you 36 more times while you're asleep, which is the only form of discipline I fully trust. Josiah's employer had it switched on by default. He turned it off in year 2 to free up $80 a month. And that $80 is the most expensive $80 in this entire video. And put the money somewhere boring. Last year, 79% of actively managed large cap funds underperformed the S&P 500, and over 20 years, about 92% of domestic funds lost to their benchmark. You're paying a professional to be worse than a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, only 5% of Vanguard participants traded during last year's volatility, and the ones who did nothing were the ones who ended the year with records. Boring is not a compromise here. Boring is the strategy. So where does that leave our 3? Ella got the match on day 1, kept it, and never touched step 2, which means one bad transmission puts her back at 0. Olivia finally logged into the health savings account, moved it out of cash, and turned on escalation, and she's the one who quietly ends up furthest ahead despite earning the least of the 3. And Josiah, who out-earns both of them, is the one who ends this decade with almost nothing, because he did step 5 first and then had to keep undoing it. He wasn't undisciplined, he was out of order. I'm not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. It's the arithmetic laid out in the sequence that actually holds up, and your situation has details that mine doesn't. But here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing on that list requires you to earn more. Not one item. The match is your money. The cushion is your money. The interest is your money leaving. The raises are obviously your money. Every step is just moving dollars you already generate into positions where they stop leaking and start compounding. That's the whole mechanism behind a phrase as dramatic as never work again. The system isn't rooting against you exactly, it just isn't designed to explain this to you. Because there's no revenue in a customer who stops paying interest and starts paying attention. So do one thing tonight, and I mean tonight, not this weekend. Open your payroll portal, find your contribution percentage, Find whatever your employer matches and make those two numbers meet. That's the entire assignment. It's the highest return you will ever be offered, and it expires quietly every year you don't claim it. Everything after tonight is just that same move on repeat. Your pay goes up, that number goes up with it, and somewhere in there the arithmetic flips and work becomes something you choose instead of something you owe.